a framework for building web apps based on Vue. Here are a few of the projects I'm involved with. Feel free to check them out. And also obligatory social networks. So you can find me on Twitter at Daniel C. Rowe and also on Mastodon at daniel@rowe.dev. And if you're wondering what Mastodon is, that's fine, because I'm going to tell you all about it in a moment. What should I say? My background is I got involved in open source, which is what I do full-time at the moment, through agency world. So I had a small creative agency. We built apps for people. I pivoted the company into software as a service. We built a SaaS app. We sold that to lots of companies. And I got more and more involved in contributing to Nuxt until I was asked to be on a maintainer, then asked to be on the core team, and then asked just this year to lead the project. So my background is very much real-world apps. And I hope that what I'm going to share with you today is an example of building a real-world app. And I hope that we're able to go into some details that might be useful for you, no matter whether you're using Nuxt, Vue, or whatever. These are some things that we've learned in the process of building a real-world app based on Nuxt 3. This is a very important picture because it shows you my normal working environment. So my normal working environment is that I have one of my 3 cats probably on my keyboard or on my desk, sitting, blocking me from actually being able to do anything. I don't know, anyone else here have pets and actually let their pet dictate what they do in any moment of time? So I will often, I'll be sort of writing code and then the cat is sitting there and I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to review a PR because I can't type. So all I can do at this moment in time is read. That's Lily, is her name. Previously, before we took her, the previous people who had her called her Hitler. Yay. I think that was rather cruel, and I think we were very glad to save her from such people. So she's called Lily. I have 3 cats and a dog as well. And I'll have a cup of coffee. And by the way, if you were ever building anything with Nuxt or any of my other projects, please feel free to message me on Twitter or Discord or whatever. I would love to help. And if you do that, I'll be sitting here at this desk probably typing a response. So do that. So this is the story of Elk, and it started in November of last year. Anthony Fu, who's one of my teammates on Nuxt, he's part of the core team, he dropped a little message in the chat just saying, hey, you know this Mastodon thing that's going on? Well, wouldn't it be an interesting idea if we built a Nuxt-based client for Mastodon? And one thing followed another, and a couple of days later, I got a GitHub invitation, a repo invitation link in my inbox. Well, that was the beginning. There were 4 of us who were part of that initial core team. So Anthony, Matthias Capelato, who's one of the key team members of Vite, and Kevin, who's one of the key team members, he's on the Vue team as well. And very, very, very quickly, things took off, despite not being public. Well, we launched Elk as a private repository, but we very, very quickly we had over 120 contributors before we launched publicly, and lots of different issues and PRs and so on. But I should tell you first what Elk is. And I should say, if you're able to look in those eyes without feeling a little bit of a tremor in your soul, I admire you. Elk is obviously not just an animal. I think that's an elk. I believe it is an elk. But it's a client for Mastodon. Now, Mastodon is a different kind of social network. Who here has heard of Mastodon? A few people. And anyone here actually have an account on Mastodon? Okay, so Mastodon is a social network that's built on a new protocol called ActivityPub. It's like Twitter in some kind of ways. People post their updates, you follow other people, and you have a feed based on other people's updates. But it's a little bit like email, because instead of there being one central server that controls everything, there are different servers, just like there are different email servers. And people have their own account, when you're followed by somebody else, they effectively say, hey, let me know when you update and when you post a new status. And then when they do that, their server tells your server about the new status. It's a way of having a decentralized network for social media. And in the past year, there have been one or two strange things on Twitter particularly that have made people start to think, hey, you know, it would be really a good idea if we weren't entirely dependent on the whims of Elon Musk for our experience, our social experience online. If you're anything like me, I love Twitter, by the way. What I love about Twitter is the fact that I can encounter people I haven't met before, hear about interesting projects, and learn. It's amazing. There's this whole world out there, and it feels like you can plug into it somehow, and it just transforms. Well, I love it. I love it. But more and more people began to think it's a shame if this experience, this thing that's going to enrich our lives, I guess, for all the negatives of social media, there's also some real richness that it brings. It would be a shame if that were all locked behind Twitter and the current policy decisions of Twitter. So a lot of people started moving to Mastodon, but there were problems. So Mastodon, that's my email. Mastodon looks a little bit like this out of the box. So it has a web app. It's maybe a little bit unfamiliar, and it's maybe not so beautiful. And certainly, when you're browsing through in that tiny central column, you might start to think that there are some things we could do to improve this. And that is where Elk comes in. So Elk is a client for Mastodon. It allows us to connect to the same server and communicate via API so that we can actually browse in something which I hope is a little bit nicer. It has support for multiple accounts. It has support for push notifications and direct messages. You can see your favorites, bookmarks. It has list support. There are lots of user interface settings. You could say change the default theme color here, sorry, I don't want to blind you. You can enable different features. So we have incredible translations by lots of people in the community. We have quality of life improvements. For example, you can enable some well-being features to avoid the ceaseless rush of comparison on social media. There are lots of things that you can do with Elk. And it is installable. It's a PWA that is installable on your phone, your iPhone now, with the latest update, or your Android or whatever else you have. That's Elk. It's a different client for Mastodon. Any questions about that, or do people, we're on board with what Elk is?
So there's loads of different kinds of clients for Mastodon?
There are other clients as well. Other clients are available. So there are clients for mobile, for example. Some are open source and free, like Elk. Some are paid. But yes, there are lots of different clients for Mastodon. It's I think one of the things I love about Mastodon is that it is open. So just as Twitter is locking down the API and saying, actually, you have to pay $100 a month in order to access it, Mastodon for a developer is incredible because you can do anything with it. You can build anything on top of it. And that feels great because it puts the power in the hands of people. Just as Mastodon is decentralized, the fact that the API is open is also pretty cool too. So here are some things that this is how we built Elk. Some things that I think were important for us, that made the experience better, that helped our community grow and contribute. We've had over, as I said, over 162 contributors so far to Elk, and basically its growth is a product of that. So here are some of the things that I think have made that possible. And it's based on, some of this is about Nuxt 3, some of it is more general. So to start with, in Elk, we use the feature of Nuxt 3, which is auto imports. So rather than starting, looking at a component and starting off with a wall of sort of 10 import statements, actually we can get straight into the logic of the code. You get type support for all of that, so your IDE knows that these things are available to you in your environment, and they'll be suggested to you when you start typing. But actually, you don't have to see the specific import. You can option click and go to the source, and you get a type checking step, so you don't lose out on anything. But it means that the logic is front and center when you're looking at the ELK project. We also use a feature of Nuxt called middleware, where you can actually define particular protection patterns to run for accessing certain routes, both on the server and then also on the client when you're performing client-side navigation. And actually, we used something a little bit like this. This is actually a plugin to handle social previews. So ELK is purely client-side rendered. So no data about your account is actually exchanged or stored anywhere on the server. We don't render your account details. It's all API requests on your computer. And that is really important because privacy is important. Well, but we also want to be able to render a little social preview. Someone posts a Mastodon link into Discord or Twitter or anywhere that you want to be able to get that nice little, this person said this, maybe a little picture. And so we actually implemented it using a Nuxt plugin. We look for crawlers, and if a crawler is accessing the URL, we actually forward them on to the original server where that data is stored, which means actually all the preview information from the original server is returned, and you get the beautiful social preview. We don't touch it at all. And that was quite a nice little thing that, again, preserves privacy, because it means that the original server can make its decision about what is exposed to search engines or not. Another thing that we did is, so Nuxt has a module system. So everything about Nuxt can be tweaked and changed. We have hooks that run at different stages in the build and development process, and users can write their own code which hook into these things and change things about what's happening. So in the build process, in the bundle process, in setting up options, in registering imports and components, and writing manifests, everything you can configure and hook into yourself. This has always been true about Nuxt. But for ELK, we found that it was a really good practice to iterate by building new features as local modules. Actually, in the latest version of Nuxt, we released first-class support for auto-detecting and running local modules, and with hot module reload even in development. But basically what it means is you can isolate particular kinds of features of functionality and then keep that separate, and then at some point you can release it as a separate package, and then other people can use that in their projects as well. So this is an example of a Nuxt module. This is one I built really early on in the process for ELK. We were iterating rapidly, and so we actually had comment. We would just comment bits of code out, and put a to-do comment in here, or we would we basically had comments everywhere. And one thing that is true about Vue is that comments are actually rendered in the HTML, and we didn't want that. We actually wanted our comments to be gone. We didn't want this to be true, because we had obviously our collaborators in our closed repo, but people were discovering ELK and starting to use it. So we wanted to get rid of them. So we just wrote a little module which adds a plugin which simply removes the comment. And the thing there that we're doing with magic string is something to do with producing a source map. This could be even simpler if we didn't care about ensuring the source map was the case. Super simple. We wrote that module, extracted it from the project. It's now redistributable. So you could drop that into any project and it would just work automatically. Lots of modules actually were built for Nuxt, were actually built during the process of making ELK. So Vite PWA, for example, is a plugin for Vite that allows first-class PWA support. The maintainer for that got involved with ELK and actually built the Nuxt module in the process, and now that's installable separately. Also view macros and view I18N, also built modules and or improved them, bug fixes. The whole experience was amazing because you're dealing with, in this little project that we created, we're suddenly having core team members from different projects and libraries get involved, integrate their library, and actually make improvements and bug fixes and feed it back in. It's the best kind of dog fooding. For example, on the module side of things, there were loads more. One of the Towery core team, you know Towery enables you to build native apps wrapping a web view but without shipping Chromium. So it's built in Rust, it's tiny, and really performant. One of the Towery core team got involved. We built a module for Towery, integrated it, and now it would be ready to actually be shipped as a separate module, so other people could integrate with Towery in the project. It was so much fun. These are just some of the other modules that we integrated in the project, and actually there are even more. I can't include them all. If you're interested in some of the things that Nuxt does support, check out nuxt.com/modules. We have a sort of community directory of modules that people are using.
Are they vetted in any way?
They are vetted in that when someone submits a request to be listed, or someone else on the core team, we look for best practices, we make recommendations, and we list the module. But we can't endorse them on an ongoing basis in that it's still a third-party package you have to take a look at. We do have a Nuxt community organization and a Nuxt modules organization on GitHub, and both of those we have much more control over. So there's continuity. If a developer ever stops maintaining a project, we can continue it. And there's other things as well. So if anyone reported an issue, we would be able to step in. But in general, it's left out to the maintainer. So hybrid serverless. This was another thing that we feature of Nuxt that we built. So that's a little module, a graph from Cloudflare of the requests to Elk. So over a 30-day period, we had 32 million requests, of which 200,000 were cached, 32 million were uncached. And the reason for that is we have a PWA module, which means that once you download an asset, it's never requested again. So those are 32 million requests, not for assets, but for pages in the app. So that's people browsing around. Those are hitting a serverless function. That is a lot of requests for a serverless function, I think. So we had to harness different features of Nuxt to actually make this possible, because otherwise it would be a killer in terms of costs. You can see there a little differentiation. That's actually bandwidth used. And you can see the vast majority of the bandwidth is cached. These are API requests and HTML requests that we're talking about, that are that 32 million. So Nuxt ships with we completely rewrote the server for Nuxt 3. We call it Nitro, and it's usable without Nuxt. So if you want, I live coded building a React native framework at the last conference I spoke at. So you can use it for anything. It's everything I'm sharing today about this you could access without Nuxt or Vue. But one of the things that Nitro allows is the ability to have a hybrid serverless server. So you can have different rules which govern different parts of your app or routes within your app. So here, for example, we can say we want to pre-render the home page. We want a static app shell, which is going to be the thing that we serve up to most users for most pages. And that's going to be able to, we don't want to regenerate that on every request. That's not going to change because we don't actually process user data on the server. It's all on the client side. So we can pre-render this. We can, at build time, render that and serve it up. The settings pages are a bit more complex. We're not going to pre-render those. Our API, so we have an endpoint, for example, as you start to type in your server name, we want to give some suggestions. Here are some servers that people have used before. Maybe it's one of these. And actually, why should every time a user hits that endpoint, it be updated? So we use SWR, stale while revalidate strategy, to mean that every 60 seconds, we will revalidate that data, but every request within that 60-second window will serve up the same data. And that just means that we can avoid, actually, we totally avoid hitting the serverless function at all, because that is, it works on Versal and Netlify. It's basically ISG, incremental static revalidation, I guess. basically the first request renders the JSON payload, stores it in the Netlify CDN, you get it directly from the CDN until that minute has expired, and then back again. And because we've built a platform-independent implementation in Nitro, you don't need to worry about whether you're deploying on Cloudflare, Vercel, Netlify, AWS Lambda, Azure Static Web Apps, or anything. This just works everywhere. We also wanted to do things like, I could give you more examples, but these are just the ones we're actually using in Elk. We wanted to set some headers for static files. Again, both Vercel and Netlify have their own ways of configuring this, but again, you can just configure it in Nitro, and the underscore headers file in Netlify is produced, or Vercel has its own build output API where we could configure the same thing. The way it works is that Nitro has this central serverless handler, which basically operates as a connector. So an incoming request comes, the central handler loads, if it's not already warm. It decides what route data needs to be loaded, and then it lazily loads the code to respond to those requests, which means that code is not passed, it's not loaded unless you're actually hitting those endpoints. And that's true also for static files, which we can handle. It also means that within your app, if in one page of your app you want to perform a request to your own API, that doesn't hit the network layer at all. We actually perform it as a direct function call, and it completely bypasses the network layer through means of this central controller. We also have auto detection for all the platforms that I've put on the slide, as well as lots of others too, and you can build your own. And we are able basically to do that by detecting the CI environment when you're building your app. So if it's being built on Netlify or Cloudflare Pages or Azure Static Web Apps workflow or whatever it is, we know, and we can produce a different kind of build output for them. And this is all just built into Nitro. That means when we went from Nuxt 2 to Nuxt 3, I did this test just 2 days ago as part of the workshop. We went from over 300 millisecond cold start to 1.277 millisecond cold start for a Nitro server. That was actually a Nitro server which we built, which had integration with Supabase, it had auth, it had server routes, it had a view renderer, it had like as full of an app as you can build in a workshop. So we're talking about this thing is really, really fast because of how it's architected. So there's lots more to say. This is not going to be that relevant to people, but we also built Nitro so that it would be it wouldn't be platform dependent. So it works in Node, but it also works in Dino. It also works in Cloudflare Workers. So nothing there, even though we do have mocks for various Node APIs, nothing is dependent on a Node environment. So actually, when I was building the Towery native implementation, because we wanted to package this up as a desktop app, which doesn't have a server. There is no server for it to store OAuth information in. But rather than have to rework it entirely, this is virtually all of the code I wrote. It's a little bit hacky, so don't use it. But basically, I just moved the server into the browser, as you do. So we have a server running in the browser that now handles, for the desktop app, that handles the OAuth secrets and so on. It was fun. We also have stackable contexts in Nuxt. So you can actually, for all of these different features of Nuxt, from components which are auto-imported, composables, and utilities are auto-imported, pages generate routes. The whole server side of things also have routes and middleware and configuration. All of these things work in layers. So you can say, here are 5 apps, merge them, and you get a single Nuxt app which includes all of them, just seamlessly merged. And so we actually use this in Elk for building our Elk native, because effectively what we want is to have our web app, but with certain customizations and things that are different for a native desktop application. So that's a cool feature too. But I don't want to get too distracted. But this is how we were able to do it. We just put an extends key. And that was a string. You could pass an array of stuff as well and add a few modules, and we're away. It does also overlays public folders, so we even have different folders with different images for the main, the staging, and the dev environment. So actually, those are layered in, and so if in different contexts, different images take priority. Okay, runtime config. So we deploy Elk. We have our hosted elk.zone, but we also allow other people to deploy it. So it's deployed by at least 10 Mastodon servers have their own Elk deploy as their sort of official front end. And they obviously need to deploy that. We publish a Docker file. We deploy to Netlify, and we use Cloudflare KV storage. But other providers use different things. They might store data on the file system. They might deploy to Vercel. They might deploy to Cloudflare. They're different. And so all of this means, and they might have a different default instance. We default to a Mastodon instance that I run called Web Tools, but there are others. And so all of this is configurable at runtime using something called Nuxt Runtime Config, which is fully typed and allows people to configure by setting an environment variable, which then flows into the rest of their app. Highly recommend that kind of runtime config setting. And yes, it's type safe. Here's another thing. I'm so sorry. There's so much I want to say, and I'm not going to be able to say it in the time. But anyway, we have KV storage. We were on the home stretch. Don't worry about this. We have KV storage because this is a common need. We have a provider-agnostic implementation, so you can just write and read key values, which can, depending on your preference, be written and read to the file system, to memory, to Redis, to Planet Scale, to various Azure implementations. You can write your own as well. We even wrote an implementation for our own project, which uses the platform native Towery storage. And you can do the same. And it basically means that we're able to leave all of this up to the end user or to an environment variable flag rather than hard coding it in the app, which again, I think is something that really, really helps the distribution of Elk and for people to be able to use it in their own contexts. And we even built a unit testing framework for Nuxt, which we've dog-fooded on Elk. So there it is, elk.zone. Check it out. If you don't have a Mastodon account, do create one. I can recommend Pachyderm as a good, yes, it's a pun on Pachyderm. And I can recommend that as a great server to get started. It's run by Chris Nova, who is a fantastic person. You can try out Mastodon and try out Elk if you want to. There's lots more that we built that I don't have time to talk about today. I will just give you one little hint for one of the things we were able to do to help people getting started with Elk. Here's a, no, not that, goodness. I'll just launch it here. Here is a local version of Elk running in my browser. One of the things that we wanted to do was give people a great experience when they were trying Elk for the first time. So we have a DevTools. This is a Nuxt DevTools. But just to give you an example of one of the things you can do, if you're browsing the project and you want to help, maybe you want to submit a PR and you don't really know how it works, you can actually pick a bit of the page and decide, hey, I want to fix that. Click it and you'll go straight there in your IDE. There's lots more that you can explore. Try Elk out and try Nuxt out, because we've tried to use Elk as a way of dog fooding and improving the framework experience as well. This is what one guy had to say. This is one of the contributors. He said he had never written any Vue before, and he contributed a significant feature to Elk, support for lists. So if you want to do that, feel free to message me. I would love to help you do it, even if you've never used Vue, even if you've never used Nuxt. The great thing about Elk, from my point of view, is this is an opportunity to customize your own experience of social media and fix all of the rough edges and bugs that you find frustrating with something like Twitter, but which you can't fix. You can with Elk, and you can with Mastodon. Here's some details about how you might go a bit further and find out a little bit more about Elk or about Nuxt, or probably me as well. You can contact me that way too. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
I think I finally understand Mastodon, so that was good. We're really short on